Let's make history. Pelham Bay neighborhood in the northeast Bronx got its name from English physician Thomas Pell. He purchased that land from the Siwanoy Native Americans back in about the mid-1600s. The Dutch, before that, the Dutch called that area Freeland, a descendant of the Pell family, because they lived there for about 4 generations. So we're talking 200 years later in the 1800s was Robert Bartow, who was a publisher, a wealthy publisher. Him and his wife, they lived downtown Manhattan at first, and they had 2 children, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl who died. And this was right during the fire, the great New York City fire of 1835. I just did a video about a week ago about the great New York City fire of 1845, because there were 3 major fires in New York City's history. 1776, the American Revolution, that is suspected to have been George Washington and his men set fire to Lower Manhattan before they departed and made their way uptown after the defeat of Washington in the Battle of Long Island. So the other fire, the second fire, was the one we're speaking of now, the great New York City fire of 1835. And it was during that fire, so much was going on in the city, and in the midst of that fire, they lost their 2 children, their 1-year-old and their 3-year-old, their boy and their girl. I mean, it wasn't due to the fire again, but you got to remember, this was when immigration was at its height in Lower Manhattan. Everybody was flooding. It started with the Irish, but all Europeans were flooding in, pretty much. Germans, ridiculously congested with new arrivals. And so, you know, you had a lot of disease. There was no running water, really. There was no, I should say, there was no large primary water supply. So you could imagine the sanitary conditions. That's the word I was looking for. And so they lost 2 children because of that. So their idea is like, you know what? We have the money. Let's just go up to the country and get an estate, build an estate, so the children can grow up around that fresh country air. And it's so weird to read about back in the day how the Bronx was considered the country. It's about fresh country air. Getting fresh country air by going up to the Bronx. Hilarious, and such a far cry from, you know, how things are today. And during the American Revolution, that land was like a was kind of like a lookout surveillance area, or what you would call a buffer zone, because you had, as I was speaking about the American Revolution, you had the Brits who basically took over Manhattan after their victory in the Battle of Long Island, and what was called the rebels or the colonists were more so clustered up in the Bronx area, which at the time was Westchester County. So they were up there. That was more so like colonist territory. So Pelham Bay, which is in the northeast Bronx, is stationed, if you're familiar with the area, or as you can see from this map, in a way whereas they could see any type of traffic coming up from Manhattan. So it's strategically located, the Pell estate. And the official name for it was Pelham Manor. The family sold the territory to the city of New York in 1888, 2 years after Bartow's death. And the city had a big project going on where they were being pressured to make more parks in the Bronx. So they had a project where they were going to make about 4 or 5 parks. Pelham Bay Park was one of them. And Pelham Bay Park is the biggest park in New York City. Many people think it's like Central Park or Van Cortlandt Park, but it's actually Pelham Bay Park. And it took them decades to really build it and develop it, but they got it in 1888 and they started then. But Pelham Bay Park features the Orchard Beach, which is iconic and famous for people growing up in New York City. I don't know about anymore, but during the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, Orchard Beach was the spot. Now, it was the spot to hang out, not so much to enjoy clean water, because that is one thing it did not have. You were in the water, you might see like a empty bottle floating by or something, you know, or something worse, which I'm not gonna say. But
today we're exploring Pelham Bay Park. At 2,772 acres, it's over 3 times bigger than Central Park. And this area has everything, including 63 sports areas such as fields, courts, and a track, massive areas for golfing, and even a horse stable.
And speaking of Orchard Beach was named Orchard Beach because it is near where the Pells actually had an orchard there. You have a museum, which is the old house. The Pell mansion is now the Bartow Pell Museum. So you have a museum, you have Orchard Beach, several golf courses, and there's now a wildlife refuge. That was one of the last features they built on the Pelham Bay Park. That whole area, City Island too, which is a part of Pelham Bay, that whole area was originally part of the town of Pelham in Westchester County. It, over the years, was pretty much for many years, and still is an Italian neighborhood, a middle-class residential Italian neighborhood, but you also have a small but significant population of Greeks and of Puerto Ricans. A lot of the Puerto Ricans whose family came during the Great Puerto Rican Migration in the mid-20th century, you know, doing better off now, and they go to, again, so you still have that concept, getting away from the overcrowded conditions of Manhattan, still even to this day, and going up to the northern Bronx, or even leaving, because now the South Bronx is congested. So you're going up into the northern Bronx, was a little more spacious, a little more of a suburban feel. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe to Will Flores TV on YouTube. Follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and X.